We do know that something strange did happen in the sky over Arizona last night.
Strange lights in the sky moving in strange ways.
Do these lights belong to visitors from outer space? Hundreds of people across the valley think it's a distinct possibility.
Simply unexplainable.
It's a lot of people wondering what the heck they saw.
Aliens, first thing I thought, but it scared the heck out of me.
I think it was a spaceship of some sort.
The most dramatic sighting in Arizona this decade.
Something was there. It was a structure. It was going 35 miles an hour. It was huge. It didn't make a sound. And you tell me what can do that.
A little spooky that they couldn't find it on radar.
2 bright lights that turned into 3 bright lights that turned into 4 bright lights.
So many experts on this today. No one seems to know what it is, or at least they wouldn't tell us.
Something strange happened in the skies over Arizona that still hasn't been fully explained. And in reality, we may never know exactly what happened that night.
On March 13th, 1997, a series of extremely strange lights and craft were spotted flying over an approximate 300-mile radius in the U.S. state of Arizona. This would ultimately go on to be one of the most infamous mass UFO sightings in history. Thousands upon thousands of people witnessed these unidentified flying objects, including military and commercial airline pilots, air traffic controllers, doctors, lawyers, retired and current police and military personnel, local and federal government personnel, and tons of other citizens and credible individuals. People of all ages were astonished, confused, frightened, and amazed by what they saw in the sky that evening. The government tried to cover up and explain away the incident, but many people maintained that the official story just did not add up. This is the mystery of the Phoenix Lights. Alright guys, I am so excited to dive into this mystery today. This topic is just so crazy. Now, if you guys know me, you know that I really love UFOs. I'm just so interested in like extraterrestrials and alien life. And this is just one of the most insane UFO sighting stories I have ever heard of. And honestly, a lot of you have probably heard of it too. This was a super infamous sighting. There's been tons of movies, documentaries, tons and tons of media coverage, books, etc. about this incident because it was just so unexplainable. So many people were part of this experience of witnessing this, and there's just so many more questions than answers. And even though I had already heard about this incident, about this mystery, I was not prepared for all of the evidence, for all of the stories, and I'm just so excited to share with you guys because I know that you're gonna absolutely love this mystery today. If this is your first time on my channel, welcome. My name is Marissa, but you can call me Mars, and this is my channel, Life from Mars. I make videos about all things mysterious and magical. I release videos like this about mysterious topics every single week. So if that's something that you're into, maybe you should consider hitting that little button down there. You know, the one that says subscribe and helps you keep watching my videos. If you want, I mean, no pressure, but that'd be really cool if you did. That being said, I just want to jump right into this topic because there's a lot to unpack here. So this all started, the whole story starts at around 7 o'clock that evening on March 13th, 1997. A man who still to this day remains unidentified called local police reporting to see a V-shaped craft in the sky over Henderson, Nevada. As far as we know, this man was the first person to have actually witnessed this phenomena that became known as the Phoenix Lights. So that was at 7 p.m. A little bit later, at around 8:15 p.m., a former police officer in Paulden, Arizona, about 2 hours north of Phoenix, called reporting to see, quote, a cluster of orange lights arranged in a V formation. He said that he had watched them move through the sky with his binoculars before they reportedly disappeared. Many people, including this witness, would later go on to describe these orange lights in this cluster as almost resembling fireballs. 2 minutes after this, other calls began to come in from multiple people witnessing reddish white orbs in the sky over Prescott, Arizona.
The first sighting last night came in from Paulden, then Prescott, and then Phoenix, where the objects turned white. The white objects were later seen over Tucson, and the last sightings were from northwest Arizona around Kingman.
So at 8:15, the former police officer in Paulden sees this V-shaped formation with these fireball orbs, and 2 minutes after that, in a completely different city, people are seeing different orbs that are whitish-reddish. It was at this point that it became pretty obvious that people were witnessing two different phenomena, two different groups of unidentified flying objects. The first one was a collection of individual orbs that remained stationary in the sky, and the other was a V-shaped formation craft that was moving slowly through the sky. So that is going to be really important as we go into this. There's two different UFOs. One is these stationary white reddish orbs, and the other are these fireball orbs that seem to be attached to some sort of craft in a V formation in something that was moving through the sky. The National UFO Reporting Center said that a flood of witness testimony stated that the V-shaped formation contained about 5 to 7 lights that moved in unison that started northwest around the Arizona-Nevada border before moving south. So this is the craft, supposedly made up of about 5 to 7 of these fireball orbs. As this formation moved through the sky, it was also claimed that one of the lights towards the back was seen moving to the front before returning to the back again. It's also really important to note that this was the night that the Hale-Bopp comet was supposed to be passing by Earth. And so a lot of people were actually looking at the sky. A lot of people had their telescopes out because they were actually trying to witness this comet. So it kind of worked out that because this comet was passing through the sky, a lot more people were looking at the sky. A lot more people were outside and paying attention and literally trying to see this comet. Meanwhile, they witnessed this completely different phenomena. So I think that that's really important because I do think that that's a big reason why so many people did end up witnessing these UFOs. So a lot of people witnessed this V-shaped craft and they reported seeing the same thing. First of all, it was said to be massive, with many estimates saying that it was at least the size of about 3 football fields. I mean, I'm talking this thing was covering entire city blocks, entire neighborhoods, and they still could not see the end of this craft. A lot of people said that it must have been at least a mile wide or more.
We could not see the whole object from front to back, from side to side. It was so big.
I would gauge this object to be several football fields. I mean, like a mile, maybe more than a mile, maybe even 2 miles. It was huge.
And it just kept going over our heads and going and going and going. And it seemed like we could actually just reach up and touch it. It was so low.
This thing was also flying super low to the ground, with a lot of people saying that it felt so close, it was almost like you could literally just reach up and touch it. Another weird thing is that people were really shook by the fact that this craft made no noise at all. This humongous object, and yet it made absolutely no noise. No hum, no engine sounds, no wind. I mean, absolutely nothing. There was literally no sound coming from this huge object. It was also moving really, really slowly, and apparently in some cases even just seemed to like hover for a while before continuing to move again, just very slowly. And obviously a lot of people would point out the fact that as far as the physics of this object was concerned, at least as far as like, you know, modern human physics is concerned, this did not make sense. It just did not make sense that this object was moving at this size in the fashion that it was. For a normal aircraft, it would literally be physically impossible for an aircraft of that massive size to move that slow, much less hover in place, and also make no noise. I mean, this was just literally defying the laws of physics. People also said that the exhaust, like the color of the exhaust that seemed to be propelling this craft, was undescribable and almost like something that they had never quite seen before. But the craft and the exhaust and this entire thing was so big that literally looking up, it blocked out all of the stars in the sky. It was like they were just looking up. They could not even see the sky anymore. They could not see the stars. They couldn't see space. All they could see from every direction basically was just this gigantic craft. I'm telling you guys, like, it's already so crazy, right? Can you imagine just being in your backyard, like with your family, trying to see a comet, and then this literally giant craft, this unbelievably huge object just flies over you? I mean, I can only imagine what people were thinking. And that just gives you guys a little taste of why this was such a crazy incident and why there was like so much questions and unexplained circumstance around this crazy incident. And we're just getting started, okay? This was like just the initial moments of this sighting. But I do want to give you guys a few more specific testimonies from specific people so you can kind of get a better idea of the actual personal experiences that people had when they saw this craft, what it was like, and what their experience was. So one witness that saw the craft was a 31-year-old man named Dana Valentine. He spotted the lights in the sky in his backyard that night and quickly called over his father, who ironically was an aeronautical engineer, to come out and see this thing. He came out and they watched together as this massive craft hovered only about 500 feet above them. Valentine was quoted as saying, quote, "We could see the outline of a mass behind the lights, but you couldn't actually see the mass. It was more like a gray distortion of the night sky, wavy. I don't know exactly what it was, but I know it's not a technology the public has ever heard about before." So this is really important. This is what a lot of people did see when they saw this craft. It was not like just like this craft, I guess you could say, as you would imagine it naturally, right? Just floating above them. It was like they could see the lights in the formation, and you could see that there was, like he said, right, some kind of mass there, but it almost looked like it wasn't fully physically manifested, I guess you could say, right? It was almost like it was just a distortion of what was really there. I heard some people kind of saying it was like, imagine like if you took that craft and you just like lowered the opacity of the craft. You know what I mean? It was like you could almost kind of see through it, but yet it had this energy and was kind of moving. It was why he says wavy. Like it was just this kind of distorted image of this craft, but clearly something was there, right? Because like he said, it was blocking out the stars and blocking out the night sky. It was very obvious that something was there, but how it was manifesting in this way was just even more confusing to people. So another witness, a 54-year-old man named Tim Lay, also describes what he saw, which was extremely similar. He said, quote, "It was astonishing and a little frightening. It was so big and so strange. You couldn't actually see the object. All you could see was the outline, as if something was blotting out the stars. The lights looked like gas. There was a distortion of the surface. Also, the lights did not spill out or shine. I've never seen a light like that." I do want to show you guys this other little interview that Tim Lay and his family also did with the news channel that describes a little bit more about what they saw and experienced.
It's getting closer and closer, and we're saying, you know, that thing's coming right at us.
Tim Lee and his family are among the hundreds of witnesses who've come forward to talk about the night of March 13th, an event now known as the Phoenix Lights. The Lees first saw the lights while looking north from their home in the Sunny Slope Mountains.
When it finally got here and we realized this thing was coming right over us, we really started getting antsy. And then when it went directly overhead without a sound, it was like that. It was so big.
You couldn't even hear the wind. It was so quiet. It was just, it just didn't even do anything. It just came through.
It was a giant V, all right? And the right side of the V went over us. The left side was like a couple blocks over it.
You just didn't know what to do. You know, it was just like, my God, how big is this thing?
So many people had eerily similar experiences and reports of what they witnessed of this object. Yet another witness, named Sue Watson, described the craft as, quote, "a shopping mall flying over my home." She said it had these lights in front and it was totally illuminated underneath. like a yellowish amber. It was a totally rounded boomerang shape. And I am showing you guys some of the clips that people have of this craft, but I really want to emphasize that people who reported this, they said that there was no way that these cameras were going to do what they were actually seeing justice. Like in the videos, you do see distortions, you do see the light kind of spilling out and different things like that, but that is not what the objects actually looked like when they were witnessing it. And another important note, obviously this was 1997, so in the first place, the video quality is just, you know, not the best, and it definitely does not do the actual phenomena, the actual event justice. So I just want to put that out there as you guys are looking at these images. Keep in mind the way people are describing them so you can really get an idea of what they actually looked like in person when this event was happening. So yeah, like I said, in the video, the lights, they do seem like they're kind of flickering and like they're moving, but all the witnesses described that these lights did not flicker and that they did not shine light, right? Some people described them almost as looking like beams, like almost like a spotlight, but it's like, you know, a normal spotlight, right? Or if you have like this huge circular light, you would think that it's going to shine some kind of light outward. But the thing about these lights is that they were self-contained. They did not flicker. They did not shine. It was like they were completely self-contained. Okay, so keep that in mind. And we kind of briefly mentioned that some people described mentioning that those lights almost look like gas, and other people almost described the distortion as if looking at water or through water. So imagine these giant lights, this outline of this craft, this huge object, you know, hovering over these towns, flying over these towns, and it has this distortion that almost looks like you're looking through a gas or through water, and it's all self-contained. That is the best way that I think that I can conceptualize what people actually saw when they saw this craft.
They were so close that they could look up and, as they said, almost touch it.
The last light went right over my wife and I, and there was no light on the ground. But I could see up inside that it was almost like a recess, and it had fluorescent like light inside, like a gas light of some kind.
You could see right through the middle of it, but it was like looking through two-way glass, like through a mirage that you see on the highway or something.
Now I don't know what to think, because this is impossible.
So although these videos were not the most amazing footage, they did later analyze them and found that that craft was at least 6,000 feet wide. So it was over a mile wide. That alone is obvious from the videos. And as I mentioned, regular citizens were not the only ones to witness this. An air traffic controller named Bill Grava was at work at the Sky Harbor International Airport when he witnessed the craft. He had been working there for over 12 years already and still said he had never seen anything like this. He called the incident, quote, weird and inexplicable, and even years later said he still, quote, didn't know what to think, saying, I have no idea what it was.
They were amber colored, very bright, and on a scale of 1 to 5, with an airplane light being maybe 2, these are 4.5 at least.
And not just Bill Grava. Many air traffic controllers were very perplexed by this object, mainly because they could not see this object or any of these lights on their radars, despite the fact that they could clearly see it with their own eyes. So it's like they can literally see these things in the sky, but yet according to the radar, there's nothing actually there. And honestly, it was a little confusing for me to even try to research this at first, because it is very obvious that whatever people saw, the two different UFO phenomena, right? The V-shaped formation, and then later, the sitting formation of lights that was not moving, whatever they saw on both ends was changing as it moves through the sky. So the V-shaped craft was not always described as looking exactly the same. There were several people who saw the lights moving, and there were also a different number of lights making up this boomerang V-shaped craft throughout the night, or as people witnessed it in different areas.
Actual craft. There were 10 different craft. If people go to the Phoenix Lights Network website, they can look at the illustrations, beautiful illustrations by Larry Lowe, as well as animations. 2 or more people had to see the same craft. And whether it was one craft that could morph, or the perspective from where the person was standing, or an actual parade, which is what what was concluded, because the mass sighting, whatever you've heard, wasn't just 1 or 2 hours, it was many hours.
At 7 p.m. when that craft was first spotted, it was reported to be made of only about 5 lights, but by the end of these sightings at around 10 o'clock, the craft was alleged to have been made of 9 of these lights. So in that time, and like I mentioned earlier, like one person saw one of the lights moving from the back to the front. In that time, it's very obvious that these lights changed and that there was more lights at the end. So this craft started off with only 5 lights, ended at the end of the sighting with 9 lights comprising this craft. And also, in some of the actual recorded footage, you can literally see the lights kind of flashing on and off randomly. So maybe it was always made up of 9 lights, but some of the lights were just not visible at the time. It's just really perplexing. There's just no way to know why that was happening. Some people also saw it at one point being comprised of 7 lights, and that it was there were 5 lights that made up the craft, right, like in the beginning, but then there was 2 lights that were kind of behind it, like trailing it, and that they would kind of like dock on and off with the object, if that makes sense. Like they would sometimes be a part of the object and then sometimes like move away from the object. So whatever these lights were making up this craft, it's very obvious that they were like either able to be moved in some way, able to be like activated and deactivated, turned on and off, however you want to describe it. But these lights were doing all sorts of maneuvers, and there was all sorts of different numbers of the lights as this craft moved throughout the sky. So that was the V-shaped craft. But like I mentioned, there was 2 distinct different things seen. There was 2 different unidentified flying objects, 2 different UFOs that were spotted during this incident. So that was the V-shaped craft, and now I want to get a little bit more into just the non-moving formation of lights that were also seen, the other UFO. So these lights were reported to be more like orbs. They had a little bit of a different color. They were more whitish. And like I said, they were stationary in the sky, so they were not moving like this craft was. That being said, though these objects were not moving through the sky and they were stationary like in the place that they were also changing formations. People saw all sorts of formations of these lights. Okay, so obviously the V-shaped craft, the boomerang-shaped craft was always in that kind of V shape, but this other formation of lights, although it was stationary in the sky where it was, like they weren't actually moving as part of a craft, the actual orbs themselves were still changing formations. People saw so many different types of formations that these orbs made up.
Some witnesses describe the fleet of lights as a V-shaped formation. Some say they were in a line. Others saw a diamond shape, and still others saw a star.
So it seems like these stationary formation of lights were seen after the original craft was spotted, and these were seen over the actual city of Phoenix, apparently near the airport, which is why so many of the air traffic controllers were able to see it. And I think that this is the one that the majority of people witnessed, because this is the one that was literally over like this huge metropolitan area of Phoenix. As far as I can see, I don't think that the craft actually flew over Phoenix. I think that it flew over like the smaller surrounding cities in Arizona. But these lights, the second UFO, was like directly above the city, and I think that that's the one that the majority of people saw. But on the other hand, the more extraordinary testimonies, the more extraordinary experiences were the people who saw this other craft. Regardless, all of this chaos, the fact that there were different formations of the stationary object, the fact that there were 2 different UFO events going on, all of this confusion, the fact that the people who saw the craft said that those orbs were like fireballs, right? So they were the orange colored orbs. The other people, the people who saw the stationary formation, those orbs were white. So you have people reporting all these different types of things. One of them is changing formations. The other one has lights that are flickering on and off and is part of a craft and is moving, but then sometimes it's stationary because it lingers there, sometimes it's moving. And they're just getting calls from literally thousands of people from all over these different cities claiming to see all these crazy things, which just kind of added fuel to the fire of like people really being so confused and not understanding what happened over that area that night. It was just very confusing for witnesses, for the media, for investigators to try to figure out what happened. Now, I also want to get into the supposed military involvement in this incident because that is also a whole factor here. One man, a truck driver named Bill Greiner, witnessed something crazy. He claimed that he was driving his truck near Luke Air Force Base, which is an Air Force base near Phoenix, Arizona, when he saw two orbs floating above the base. He said that at that moment, after he saw these two orbs floating above the base, that 3 F-16s took off from the base, and that one of the F-16s was actually briefly pursued by one of the orbs before it shot up into the sky and disappeared completely. Bill Greiner was absolutely shocked by his experience and even said, quote, "Before this, if anybody told me they saw a UFO, I would have said, yeah, and I believe in the tooth fairy. Now, I got a whole new view. I may just be a dumb truck driver, but I've seen something that don't belong here, and I wish the government would just admit it." He also described what it was like for the people of Phoenix after the incident, saying, quote, "You know what it's like in this city right now? It's like 50,000 people in a stadium watching a football game, and then having somebody tell us we weren't there." That one got me, guys. Honestly, that one really got me. It's like, it's true. Like, all of these literally thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of people saw this, and they were just acting like it didn't even happen. Because at this point, there really was not very much talk about this publicly at all. Yes, there was like media coverage by local media, but it had not been picked up by national media yet. Obviously, this was like before the days of the internet, so it was kind of just like this thing that happened to the people in Phoenix. It was not acknowledged by anybody as far as like government or city officials at first for a long time. The only thing that literally happened after this insane day of literally over 3 hours of people seeing these things, tens of thousands of people experiencing this, the only thing that happened was that like the local media did some news coverage about it and did some interviews. But other than that, I mean, they literally did act like nothing had happened. And I also do want to mention that this was not the first time that lights like these had been seen in this area. One woman, Dr. Lynn Keaty, which I hope I'm saying her name right, reported that she first saw strange lights over Phoenix in 1995, which was 2 years before the mass Phoenix light sighting in 1997. It was at that time that her and her husband witnessed a triangle formation of lights. 2 lights at the bottom, 1 on the top, hovering in the sky only about 100 yards from their home. They were both startled and amazed as they watched them hover over an otherwise dark and empty desert area. She described the lights as being oval-shaped and a glowing amber color, very similar to those seen in the Phoenix Lights incident. She also noted that it was particularly interesting to them how the lights did not have any glare. They seemed to be very self-contained, unlike the city lights or other plane lights that would pass in the distance. She actually ended up taking a few pictures of this light before the top light looked like it was just dimming out until you couldn't see it anymore. She described it slowly fading out as if it was on a dimmer switch. She also said that it was as if the object was still there, but she just could no longer see it. Soon, the bottom left light did the same thing. Lynn also said that when she was watching the lights, that there was this eerie quiet, again, no noise, and that it almost felt as if time had slowed. And although she had never witnessed anything like this before, she said that she couldn't help but feel like there was some kind of intelligence behind these lights. And for years, she would look at these pictures that she had taken and wonder if she would ever find out what they were or if she would ever see anything like that again. Fast forward to 1997 and she would see another strange sight. However, this was in January 1997, still 2 months before the Phoenix Lights incident in March. She saw 3 lights again, but this time they were in a line formation and they were the same amber color and had the same behavior as before. And the next night, the lights appeared again, but this time they were in a different formation. They were lower in the sky and they seemed to be in a little bit of a different location, this time in front of the mountain. So now at this point, Lynn is thinking, oh my God, I keep seeing these objects. So she runs to get her video camera and she was able to get about 18 seconds of footage before her camera died. So she runs back inside to change the battery real quick, but by the time that she comes back out, the lights were already gone again. And at this time, her husband ends up getting home from work and she tells him, oh my God, I just saw these lights again, and this time they were over here. And she starts pointing to the area of the sky that they were in, and as she's doing this, they reappear again. So at this point, she is just like super hyped. She's like, oh my God, they're back, they're back. So she goes to get her film camera so that she can take a picture. And as she's about to take this picture, 6 more orbs appear above this original 3. And Lynn would later note that these lights were in the exact same formation, looked exactly the same, and were even in the exact same location as those stationary orbs that were seen later in the Phoenix Lights incident. So it seems seemingly possible that these UFOs had visited Phoenix before this Phoenix Lights event even ever took place. Now, Lynn, this woman, after having all of these experiences, she wants answers. She wants to know what she saw. This was now the 3rd time that she had seen these lights, and so she decides to call the Arizona Republic newspaper. She doesn't really get any answers from them. They didn't get any other reports, but they recommend to her that she should try to call the Air Force Base, Luke Air Force Base. She thinks, you know what? Oh my gosh, that's such a good idea. I will definitely call the Air Force Base, so she decides to do that. So she ends up talking to a lieutenant from Luke Air Force Base, and she tells this lieutenant that her and her husband are both physicians, but they saw something strange in the sky over South Mountain from their home in Phoenix. Now, she says that this conversation with the lieutenant was pretty difficult, that the lieutenant was just very short with her and basically just said, it did not come from Luke Air Force Base or into Luke Air Force Base, so we had nothing to do with it, and pretty much that's it, that was that. And she's trying to press her for answers, and finally the lieutenant tells her, you know what? You said that you saw these in front of this mountain that's close to the airport. Why don't you call the airport, see if they saw anything? It was probably some sort of craft, right? Like, why don't you call the airport? And so she's thinking, okay, you know what? Yes, let me go and do that. This is my next lead. So she ends up getting the FFA on the phone. She describes to them what she saw, what time it was, the dates, everything, and they decide to check the radar, and of course, just like in the Phoenix Lights, they don't see anything on the radar. They did not pick up the original 3 lights or the 6 lights that appeared above them later. They did not pick up any of that at all on radar. However, one thing that did come out of this event of her calling the airport was that the air traffic controllers described what they saw that night in January. Turns out they also saw these orbs from the airport. Just like they saw the Phoenix Lights, they also saw these lights in January because, like she said, they were in the same position right near the airport. They said that they had seen those 6 lights that were in a string, that they looked like they were attached to something, but that they could not see what it was. Also, it's important to note here, and this was noted by some of these air traffic controllers, that if these were flares, that it would have been impossible for these air traffic controllers to see them because there was actually a military range on the other side of the mountains where flares were dropped all the time. But because they were behind the mountain, it was impossible for these air traffic controller people to see that from the other side of the mountain. So they would never see any of these activities that were going on in this range behind the mountain. The mountain was always obstructing their view of these flare and different activities that would go on there. So they knew that these were not flares because if they were flares, it would have been on the opposite side of the mountain like it always was, and they would not have been able to see it from where they were. Whatever this was, it was on the other side of the mountain. It was in front of the mountain, right next to the airport. So the air traffic controllers, they admit to Lynn what they saw, and she asked them what it was, and of course she's just met with silence because they did not know what it was either. Apparently all she was able to get from the air traffic controllers after like pressing them, like, what do you guys think it was? What was it? Why can't you tell me what it was? Like, what is it? And that all that the air traffic controller told her was, quote, beats me. Beats me. IDK, ma'am. IDK. And now, you guys might be wondering, if this lady saw these lights before the Phoenix Lights incident, if these air traffic controllers also saw these lights before the Phoenix Lights incident, there must have been other people, right, that also saw these lights before the Phoenix Lights incident? And you would be right, other people had seen these lights too. One man named Steve, who was living south of Phoenix, reported to UFO investigator Bill Hamilton that him and his family had seen the exact same lights for 3 nights prior to the March 13th incident. So this is not the same sighting as the one in January. This is one just 3 days prior, or literally the 3 nights prior to the Phoenix Lights incident, the one that happened on March 13th. He said that every single day for those 3 nights prior, they had seen these exact same lights. And his story of what he saw was pretty much exactly the same as what Lynn had saw, like in these other appearances, that at first they appeared higher in the sky, and that later on, or then they disappeared, and the next time that they saw them, they were lower in the sky in front of the mountain by the airport. So the same kind of behavior and the same description of what they looked like and everything. So obviously with this and other evidence, it's clear that this Phoenix Lights incident was definitely not the first time this area had UFO activity, and that maybe even possibly these UFOs had like scoped out the area before deciding to just go full out, full performance on March 13th. Now, let's get into the response from authorities and investigators that followed the Phoenix Lights incident. Hi guys, so you might notice at this point in the video that I am wearing a completely different outfit, and that is because it is not the same day. So we're just gonna acknowledge that, but at the same time, just know that we're just gonna continue right where we left off. And yeah, I just ended up having to film on a different day, so here we are, let's go. So at first, when this first happened, authorities were pretty much completely silent, okay? There was no statements made at all to the public, to the media, on behalf of the local government, on behalf of the state government, the Arizona government, on the federal government side, on the military side. Like, nobody said anything at all. They were just completely silent. And the only coverage really that there was just a few local news stations that were covering the story. No one really had any answers. People were just really confused, perplexed, obviously just stunned by what had happened, but still there was literally nothing at first said by authorities. It was just local media that realized this even happened at first, or shall I say acknowledged that this happened, because I'm sure the authorities knew, they just were not ready to acknowledge it yet. Finally though, after this initial incident in March, couple months later, on May 6, 1997, there was a city council meeting, and a brave soul, a city councilwoman, a woman named Frances Barwood, asked during the city council meeting, she asked the mayor directly if there would be an investigation into the Phoenix Lights incident. She essentially asked if anyone knew what the object was and if there was any way that they could look into it. And she said that when she asked this question, that she was kind of just met by stares from the other council members, and that after the meeting, apparently the city manager approached her and told her, "You shouldn't have asked that." Why would they not want her to ask that, guys? I don't know. And I mean, I guess that was just a warning for her of what was to come, because after she brought it up during that meeting, she was pretty much completely ostracized, and she faced a lot of backlash for bringing it up in this official setting, because obviously they were just trying to ignore it. They were trying to, you know, brush it all under the rug, and now they have this city council member who's bringing it up, and it's like, we don't talk about that, Frances. So yeah, after that, she was met with all of this backlash. The local newspapers were making like cartoons about her and making fun of her, you know, saying that she just loved UFOs and kind of just trying to, like, you know, I guess minimize her opinion and like make her look crazy so that they wouldn't have to take her thoughts and like her genuine inquiries into this crazy event, you know, seriously, or have her seen as be legitimate. But obviously she was speaking for all of these people who were asking the exact same things. So although she did receive a lot of support for coming out and asking about it, she also faced a lot of backlash as far as like the actual authorities were concerned and like, you know, the higher up powers that be. Frances Barwood even described that they put posters up of her in the mayor's office, and also that they apparently passed around business cards with her name on it, and it said, "Speak into the tinfoil, I will hear you." Can you believe that, guys? At the literal mayor's office. So yes, even though she did face this backlash from like the authorities and her peers in the government, a lot of people were still really grateful that she was talking about this, and so tons of witnesses came forward to her and were sharing their stories with her, and she kind of became like, not really, but like an unofficial spokesman of this movement in the government, because someone had finally spoke up, someone was finally validating all of these people's experiences. Or like I said, at least acknowledging it, right? Acknowledging that something happened. So at this point, Frances Barwood is pretty much the only person that's doing interviews and that's talking about this, but everyone else in the government was still ignoring it. There was still no investigation going on, and you know, they continued to act like nothing had happened, basically. That was until USA Today published an article on June 18th, 1997. They did a story on the Phoenix Lights on this incident, and after that, they really brought nationwide attention and amazement and curiosity to this incident. They sensationalized this event, saying, quote, "On March 13th, hundreds of people reported an enormous object or objects in the night sky. It's the most confounding UFO report in 50 years." They also called out the authorities in the article. They said, "So far, there is no explanation, but the government is not investigating. Local and federal agencies disagree about who should pursue the report." After this happened, after this article came out and there was actually nationwide attention on this case, more media, they had to do something. And this really put a lot of pressure on the Arizona authorities to speak about this event, because now they could not just ignore it and act like it didn't happen. So the then governor of Arizona, Fife Symington, he came out and he made a statement. He said that he had taken a quick glance at some video of the Phoenix Lights, of the incident, and that he found it intriguing, and that they would be launching an investigation through DPS into the cause of the Phoenix Lights. His tone was very serious about this, and he was just kind of like very matter of fact, straight to the point, and said that they were definitely gonna do the research and figure out what was the cause behind this incident. So obviously people were really happy about this, or at least this was finally some kind of acknowledgement, an official acknowledgement, and also some kind of like, you know, actual promise that maybe there would really be an answer as to what these people experienced. And in fact, later on in the day, the governor made an announcement that the DPS had already found startling information, is what he said, into the case, and that they would be announcing that later that day. So it was kind of like he made the announcement that there was going to be an investigation. That same day, he was saying that they had already found startling information and that they were finally going to be sharing this with the public. So later on, he has another press conference. Now, people are tuning into this press conference. They're really excited, like I said, to see what the governor has to say. Finally, you know, all the nation's eyes are on this governor right now, you know, on Arizona, and everyone now is wondering what happened. Not just the people who experienced it, especially them, but also just the public at large, the whole country, right? People everywhere were asking questions about what could have possibly happened. And this man, this governor, is finally saying, we have real information. So what does he do when he comes on stage to do this press conference? Does he offer that startling information? Does he give some kind of explanation? No. He does this.
And now I'll ask Officer Stein and his colleagues to escort the accused into the room so that we may all look upon the guilty party. Don't get him too close to me, please.
In the alien costume, the governor's chief of staff.
Now, this just goes to show that you guys are entirely too serious.
Yeah. So after promising that he knew the responsible party for the incident, he called forward his chief of staff to the stage, said that this was the responsible party, and this man, his chief of staff, was dressed up in a full alien costume. Obviously, this was an attempt to make fun of the idea that extraterrestrials could have been involved in this incident, but people did not take this well, and people did not think it was funny. Not only are they not being given a legitimate explanation, not only is there not any evidence that's actually being presented like they were promised, but now they genuinely felt like people were making fun of them, right? Like the governor is making some joke out of this crazy incident that happened that a lot of people were obviously even afraid, right? Like, can you imagine experiencing something like this? And it just honestly really resonates with what the truck driver said when he said that it's like you have 50,000 people in a stadium watching a game and then everyone tells you that you weren't there. I mean, of course, you know, as it is, they had not acknowledged it for months, but now finally the governor has this emergency press conference, and this is what he does, you know, like just makes fun of them even more. And obviously that also made people think, okay, so why is he doing this? Because this was very out of character for this governor. First of all, he had never been a person that was like, you know, a comedian. He wasn't really cracking too many jokes in his political, you know, career or really in like the public eye. So it was just very strange that he would pull this kind of stunt. Apparently even the actual DPS were upset about this because they had already started to organize and prepare for an actual investigation. Now there is kind of a little bit of a conspiracy theory behind this because there is the fact, the very important fact here, that this governor was facing a federal indictment, okay? He was like facing federal charges, and apparently he had a hearing that same day, basically in between statements. So he had made those initial statements, said that they were going to launch the investigation, and then later, you know, announced this other emergency press conference later in the evening, right? Well, apparently in between that, he had this hearing for this federal indictment, and a lot of people speculate if this had anything to do with the way that he responded later on, with, you know, maybe he was threatened or told, you know, the way that you react to this will possibly impact the outcome of this indictment. So people think, like, did he do this because he was being threatened or because he was being influenced by like another party, right? Like the federal government or the military or whatever, you know, powers that be. So a lot of people wonder and speculate if the reason his tone shifts so much between these initial statements where he was completely serious to like making all these jokes at this press conference, people wonder if the indictment had something to do with this. And honestly, guys, the best part about this is that the governor later, years after this, would admit that he actually had an experience with the Phoenix Lights as well, and that he saw the craft himself, okay? Now, like I said in that initial statement that he had made back in the day when he was the governor in 1997, all he said was that he saw a brief glimpse of a video of the incident, and years later he went on to admit that not only did he not just see a video, but that he saw the craft himself, and that he was also amazed and perplexed and, you know, just confused and intrigued by everyone else who had seen this craft. It's actually kind of crazy. He actually recently did a long sit-down interview talking about it and exactly what he saw. And I just want to read to you guys this quote of what he saw, because he really did have like an exceptional experience, which is just crazy, and says more and lends more to the idea that he was saying these things and acting like he didn't believe in it and making fun of it because someone else told him to do that, right? So this is what he said. This was his quote, and this is what he claims he saw. He said, quote, "I saw a huge craft come right over Squaw Peak. It was just breathtaking. As a pilot and a former Air Force officer, I can definitely say that this craft did not resemble any man-made craft I have ever seen. It was certainly not high-altitude flares, because I have never seen flares fly in formation. Unquestionably, it was a UFO."
No, I'm serious now. that it was unquestionably it was a UFO, which means unidentified flying object.
That doesn't mean we're being visited.
Well, it's nothing like anything I've ever seen. I don't know what I saw, but it was really something, and I'm not going to talk about it.
Something, though, that you think our own government may have been kind of running by a populated area to see what would happen?
I don't think so. I think this was technologically far advanced.
Guys, can you believe that? Like, that is straight from the governor's mouth, okay? And like I said, he may not have been saying that at the time, and definitely, you know, would not have admitted that until years later, right? Like, almost 20 years after the fact, now he feels comfortable talking about that. But it's crazy because looking back on it now, it really does confirm even more, right? Like, the governor himself believed that it was a UFO and that this was not a human-made craft. It's just crazy to think about. But I want to point out one particular thing that he says in that quote, and that is the fact that he says that he is absolutely certain that they were not flares, that the lights were not flares. That is going to become very important right now because that is the exact explanation that was eventually given as to the legitimate reason behind the Phoenix Lights incident. They claimed that they were flares. The Air Force would go on to claim that the lights that people saw in the sky that night were actually just dropped as part of a training exercise and that they were just high altitude flares. They were like, don't worry guys, like, we totally forgot to tell you 10 months ago, but this entire thing was superly easy explainable. Very simple explanation that we literally could have given you months ago. It was just high altitude flares. Don't worry about it. We forgot to mention that, especially when we were saying months ago that we had nothing to do with this. We forgot we did have something to do with this. We were actually the only cause. We just forget about our flares, you know? So they claimed that these flares were dropped over Barry M. Goldwater Range near Gila Bend, Arizona. Even though, like I said, the Air Force Base, the Davis Air Force Base, had originally completely denied any involvement in this incident when it happened in the beginning. But they were now coming forward and claiming that these flares were dropped in high altitude over this area and that that was what people saw in the sky that night. Pretty much immediately, people did not really buy this, and there were so many questions. One, why did they completely deny having any responsibility in the beginning when they could have easily just quelled all these rumors and media speculation and just said something in the beginning and just told people what it was if it was such a simple explanation? And also, there was numerous reasons why people just did not believe that these lights could have been flares. First of all, let's talk about the elephant in the room, that one of these things was a legitimate craft. Not sure how they would think people would believe that flares were that crazy craft that they saw. Don't think that that makes any sense.
Do you think it could have been flares, Sue? Do you think it could have been a formation of U.S. Air Force A-10s out of Tucson or the Snowbird, Canadian Snowbirds aerobatic team?
Absolutely not, and that's probably the most insulting thing I heard later on down the road when it was joked about on the news, was that it could be flares. It was a unit. It was together. It was something that was a solid vehicle that we saw. Absolutely not.
But mainly, these flares were kind of being used to explain the other light formation that was seen in the sky, the one that was stationary, that was not moving. They said that those were flares and kind of just ignored, I guess, the fact that there was also a craft. I don't know. It really seems almost ridiculous to me that they would put out that explanation, but that's what they did, and obviously, like I said, people did not really buy it, but that's the answer that they were given. They did allege that basically these flares were being carried by the wind and that that's why they were seen over such a large distance. And there actually was one incident where apparently a journalist filmed military dropping flares in this particular exercise, and that people said that it did look exactly like the Phoenix Lights, allegedly. But even besides the fact that people didn't believe they were flares and they were confused as to why they were barely coming forward, there was also a lot of other details in the official report that did not make sense. First of all, the military alleged that they dropped these flares at 10 p.m. Now, let me remind you, as we already talked about, that people were seeing things since around 7:30 p.m. So they said that they dropped these flares at 10 p.m., but that does not account for the tons of people that witnessed something between 7:30 and 10. So basically just 3 hours of already seeing this phenomena that are completely unaccounted for in this official explanation. And obviously, like I said, another major thing was that this did not explain the craft that people saw. Those people know 1,000% that that was not just flares. I also do want to mention that even though there was that one journalist who said that they staged this, flare incident and the people said it looked exactly like the Phoenix Lights, there was also another incident that kind of debunked this. 3 years after the Phoenix Lights incident, the National Guard actually dropped flares in an attempt to mimic the Phoenix Lights. People who saw this test were not convinced that this is what they saw, and I honestly feel like even just looking at the footage, you can tell that this is not the same thing. The flares moved around erratically, they flickered out quickly, and also they never stayed in any particular formation, just like the governor said. Their behavior was just not at all the same as the lights that people saw that day. And even still, there were people that even had other possible explanations that they swore by as far as what caused the Phoenix Lights incident. There was this one man named Mitch Stanley. He said that he was using a high-powered telescope on that night of the incident that was something like 1,500 times more powerful at letting in light than the human eye. So he said that he was using this telescope on the night of the Phoenix Lights and that he saw the lights, he zoomed in, he saw exactly what they were, and that they were just planes. Yeah, so he said that the Phoenix Lights, they were planes. I saw them. They were literally just planes. Now, this obviously seems contradictory to other claims. Not only did people see things that were obviously not planes, I think that it was like pretty easily discernible that this was not a plane in the very least, and that the giant craft was not a plane, allegedly, and also that those stationary orbs were not planes, and especially considering the fact that there was no planes reported to be in the sky during that incident. And remember, nothing was caught on radar. So it seems pretty obvious that that was just either not true, this guy was lying, or he was just making things up. Because if they were real planes, they definitely would have been seen on radar. And it's kind of crazy though, because despite the fact that this guy's claim just seems really radical and just kind of nonsensical, his claims are still a favorite among a lot of skeptics that this was a UFO. And despite the opinion of the authorities and of skeptics, there is still a lot of people who witnessed the incident and also people who didn't, that do 100% believe that this was a UFO sighting and that extraterrestrials, the aliens themselves, may have very well been involved. One special effects expert examined the footage and he said that him and his team meticulously analyzed this footage and that they could come to no conclusion about what could have even possibly caused what is seen on this footage. They described the lights as a perfectly uniform light with no variation from one edge to the other and no glow. They've ruled out lasers, flares, holograms, and aircraft lights as sources. So basically, because of the actual way that these lights behaved, there was just no way that it could have been caused by anything that we know to exist. Like, we don't have anything that would make light behave in such a perfect, symmetrical, solid way like that. Which is exactly what people said when they saw these lights too, right? Like, they were just amazed at the way that they appeared. I also want to share with you guys some claims that were made by an anonymous airman from Luke Air Force Base about the Phoenix Lights incident. He actually came forward with these claims literally the day after the incident, okay? So he did not come forward months later just trying to get media clout, right? Because this was when no one was talking about it yet. He said that the base had gotten a call that night from Prescott Valley Airport, the same airport that we talked about earlier where the air traffic controller saw the lights but did not detect anything on radar. Well, allegedly, they contacted Luke Air Force Base and they reported an object that had a near miss with a small Cessna. He said that this call came in at 8:32 p.m. Okay, so again, this lines up more with the actual timeline that people experienced, right? Not the military saying that they dropped these flares at 10. No, apparently this happened at 8:42. That is when the airport allegedly contacted the Air Force Base. He said that it was in response to this call that the Air Force decided to send 2 F-15s to investigate. He also describes the experience of one of the pilots in one of those F-15s. He said that when they left the base, one of the F-15s was initially pursued by one of these objects. He said, quote, "The command officer of this particular flight, I've never seen this man so scared." His statement was that they followed this aircraft and it was on a straight line course. He saw 5 distinct lights in a triangular pattern. And I just want to point out, if you guys didn't already realize, that this aligns with the trucker's story. Remember the trucker who said that he saw 2 F-15s leaving the Air Force Base and that he saw one of the freaking pilots get pursued? And that he knows that they saw this? Well, someone else's story lines up with that too. So, did that really happen? Probably did, allegedly. But that's not all this airman said. He said that after these reports came in from the pilot, the Air Force Base, quote, had a complete lockdown. All hell broke loose, basically, and the facility was closed. And obviously, guys, not surprisingly, the Air Force has officially denied that any of this ever took place. However, it is interesting to think, when you think about the timing, that this apparently did happen around 8:30. Now, they officially claim to have dropped the alleged flares around 10 o'clock. And so I was even wondering, maybe did they actually drop flares at 10 as trying to cover up what they knew was already going on, like, so that they could really offer a legitimate explanation? Like, did they actually drop flares, but then it was purposeful because they were trying to cover up the fact that there was already a UFO? I don't know if that makes sense, but that's just one theory. But honestly, I do kind of genuinely doubt that, because a lot of people will still completely 100% claim that there was nothing in the sky that night that was a flare. Nothing that they saw could have been a flare. People who saw both incidents, right? Like people who saw the craft and people who also saw the standing formation. Both of those groups of witnesses said that neither of those things were flares. And you know, I believe them. I mean, these people know what they saw. I also think that it is super key here to consider that there have been sightings all around the world for years of similar crafts to the ones that were supposedly witnessed during the Phoenix Lights incident. These V-shaped or boomerang-shaped crafts have been seen countless times by people all over the world. There's tons of other footage of crafts like this, so it does not seem crazy or unlikely that one of these crafts could also be in Arizona, you know? There are even alleged sightings that were reported by ancient civilizations of these kinds of things. Could it really just be coincidence that these modern sightings are so similar to what was depicted by these ancient civilizations? Could this be evidence that these UFOs have been visiting Earth for a long time, and that not only were they in Arizona that night, but they also have been visiting Earth for hundreds or maybe even thousands of years? These are the questions that we gotta ask ourselves, you know? So now, 25 years after the Phoenix Lights incident, we are still no closer to really knowing what happened in the sky over Arizona that night. All we really know for sure is that people witnessed something that is unexplainable. There was some sort of craft, and possibly another craft, other crafts, or some sort of other lights that did fly over the land and cities of Arizona. Was this really the result of extraterrestrial visitation? Was it some sort of secret military operation or project or testing? Or is there some other explanation entirely that people are not even considering? There's a lot of speculation, but the truth is that there may never be a way to actually know for sure. But it is intriguing to consider all of the other sightings that do seem to be connected to this one. And that yes, this one was sensationalized and made to be very popular and infamous because it was such a mass sighting. But sightings like this do happen kind of frequently and also have happened for a long time. So is it possible that whatever flew in the sky on the nights of the Phoenix Lights incident is connected connected with all of these other sightings? These are questions that we have to ask ourselves when we're looking at these kinds of mysteries and when we're considering what is actually happening in our world, what is actually happening in the universe. And yes, it's important to consider, like, you know, official explanations and what we would consider reasonable explanations. It's also really important to look at the evidence and not ignore what the evidence is telling us, even if that means that we don't understand something that's happening or that we don't have a explanation that fits in the current mold of official explanation or science or reasonable situations. But I really want to know, what do you guys think of the Phoenix Lights incident? What do you really think happened that day in 1997? What flew over Phoenix? What flew over Arizona? What was that craft that people saw, guys? Like, how was it so big and seemingly defying the laws of physics and, you know, behaving and appearing in this really strange and just unbelievable way? And what about the other lights? What were those about? Do you think that any of this could have actually been flares, aircrafts, or something else? Like, what is your theory? Do you think it was UFOs? Do you think it was the military? Do you think it was something else? What do you think? And I would also absolutely love to hear from anyone who has firsthand knowledge, like maybe you remember the Phoenix Lights happening, maybe you saw them, or maybe someone in your family had an experience or someone you know. I really would love to hear more like personal opinions from actual witnesses. But thank you guys so much for joining me for this episode of Mysteries That Blow My Mind. If you have suggestions as to mysteries that I should cover, you should definitely go send those over to me on Instagram. My Instagram is the same as my YouTube channel at Light From Mars. I'll have a little link in my description and it'll also be up here on the screen so you guys can see it. But thank you guys so much for watching this video. I really hope that you enjoyed. Don't forget to subscribe if you do like mysteries and other fun related content, because I have a lot more coming for you guys. I hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and I will see you on the next one. Bye!